Good morning. We've got a few people here, are close to here. We might want to just get started. When we get a quorum, we'll do the minutes. But let's start it with comments on the bill. So is Commissioner of Labor and Industry here? How about the Commissioner of Commerce? Why don't you come on down, Commissioner Kelly, and let's get started. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you for allowing me to be here. For the record, I'm Steve Kelly. I am the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Commerce. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and others for including the governor's budget recommendations in the committee proposed omnibus budget bill. And I will just highlight a couple of the things in that budget proposal that are important to the department for various reasons. Thanks particularly for including our operating budget adjustment. As members may know, in the previous biennium, we were the only agency that did not receive an operating cost increase to the budget, and this will enable us to pay our rent, but also more importantly to fill a number of open positions that are important to the core operations of the department. We also appreciate the inclusion of our IT system modernization. That will help us provide greater security and privacy for data that the department holds, as well as increasing the efficiency of various applications, including ones used by the public and by other agencies, including the e-dockets and e-filing systems. We also are grateful that you've included the system modernization for the unclaimed property program, because that system is due for an upgrade that will increase the security of the system and also make it easier for Minnesotans to discover whether the state holds any of their unclaimed property. We also have included some modernization to our statutes, which are important to recovering property for Minnesotans and enabling them to access it. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the department has been involved in some litigation that led to an award of attorney's fees, and we appreciate the inclusion of those fees in this bill, because it will prevent a reduction in other operations in the department in order to cover those fees. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We're not going to take any questions today, so I appreciate your comments. We will take them in consideration as we move forward. The Commissioner of Labor and Industry, please step up to the microphone and offer your thoughts on this bill.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Lepping with the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, Chairman and members of the committee. So I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this morning on the Omnibus Job Economic Developments Bill. So as you all are aware, the governor's One Minnesota budget focuses on the issues that Minnesotans have made clear matter to them, bringing down the cost of health care, improving education, and ensuring communities across the state are prospering. The governor's budget makes hard choices, balancing the urgent need to make critical investments in the people of Minnesota while maintaining fiscal stability. The Department of Labor and Industry commends the bill's investments in many of the priorities set out in the governor's One Minnesota budget, and the bill's commitment to providing resources necessary to secure and sustain the prosperity of Minnesota's communities and ensure all Minnesotans have the opportunity to build a better life for themselves and their families. the bill's full funding for the governor's budget request to complete the workers' compensation modernization system and to implement critical updates of the department's aging IT systems that perform key operational functions across the agency will allow the department to better serve and to continue to provide strong services to the department's many constituents. And we thank the committee for that funding. The bill, while not fully funding the governor's budget request to increase the department's capacity to combat wage theft, it does provide significant funding that will allow the department not only respond to the current number of wage theft complaints it receives, but to conduct investigations of workplaces where workers are too vulnerable to complain or in sectors where wage theft has become, for many businesses, the way of doing business. The bill also provides needed funding for the department to effectively and efficiently perform its enforcement, education, and outreach responsibilities under the Sick and Safe Leave Bill and the Paid Family and Medical Leave Bill to ensure employers and workers understand their rights and responsibilities under these bills. And it appropriates $800,000 in additional funding for the Helmets to Hard Hats program that supports veterans entering apprenticeship programs. The bill also fully maintains the base appropriations for the department's established and long-standing labor standards, apprenticeship, LEAP, prevailing wage, workers' compensation, and OSHA programs. And the bill also includes legislative policy proposals in the governor's budget requests. And we fully support the bill's inclusion of those provisions and and the funding that is associated with them. The OSHA penalty conformity with the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Act, the licensing of solar panel installers as residential contractors and their contribution to the Residential Recovery Fund, and the reduction in the cost of licensing for persons involved in combative sports events in order to make Minnesota more attractive to organizers of these events are also included in the bill, and the department appreciates the committee's support for those primarily policy proposals. The Omnibus bill also includes the provisions addressing needed housekeeping amendments related to the department's construction codes and licensing responsibilities. While housekeeping sounds a bit boring, these provisions will help the department be more effective and efficient, particularly in its construction codes and licensing work, and we appreciate the support. The department strongly supports and is committed to ensuring the inclusion of, The bill, however, provides only partial funding for the governor's budget request to increase the number of grants issued to YST training programs and the maintenance of one FTE that supports the development of those partnerships between schools and employers to induce students to careers in advanced manufacturing, agriculture, automotive, healthcare, and IT, and provide them with classroom instruction and paid on-the-job training with employers in those sectors who have partnered with the program. Providing only partial funding for the governor's youth skills training program of $1.5 million of the $2.2 million requested in the governor's budget will result in fewer funded partnerships or less value to each funded partnership, and would impact the ability to develop a sustainable model for this in-demand program. The department estimates that approximately 1,750 students would be denied the opportunity to participate in the program as a result of the funding reduction and gain exposure to these high-wage and high-demand industries. Further, the bill eliminates the Workforce Development Fund appropriation for the pipeline program of approximately $300,000 each year, and this reduction in funding would be significant. The number of workers who have the opportunity to participate in a dual training program and earn industry-recognized credentials and wage increases would be reduced. Expansion of dual training and registered apprenticeship in key industries, including advanced manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare, and information technology, would be slowed as a result of these reductions. And furthermore, the department's ability to engage in outreach across the state to share with employers the benefits of employment-based dual training, including registered apprenticeship would be limited. So consequently, The department would seek a reconsideration of decisions to only partially fund these priorities in the governor's budget, and also the decision to eliminate completely the workforce development funding for the pipeline program. So I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this morning. The department remains committed to working with the author of these mini bills and the various appropriations and other members of the committee to help ensure that the governor's priorities for health, care, education, and prosperity of communities, and in particular that prosperity is shared with all Minnesotans. We stand ready to continue to work with you and advocate for those proposals. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Levitt. Next on the agenda is Carrie Johnson. And I'm going to remind you that we have a very, very long list. I'm going to actually remind everyone today. We have a very, very long list of testifiers, so we are limiting testimony to 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Chair Mahoney, members of the committee, my name is Carrie Johnson. I am the Senior Policy Advisor at the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers, which is also a member of the Minnesota Asset Building Coalition. I'm aiming for under 60 seconds. I'd like to thank the chair and committee for the inclusion of House File 414, increased funding for the Spark Competitive Grant Program, formerly the Business Development Competitive Grant Program, in the Omnibus Jobs Finance Bill. This program has been helping nonprofits offer business technical assistance at no cost to thousands of small business owners and entrepreneurs statewide for almost a decade. A funding increase would mean that more organizations could receive these grants, potentially leveraging even more in private financing and helping more communities across the state. The competitive nature of this program will allow DEED to not only ensure that funding is distributed evenly geographically, but a requirement of receiving this funding is reporting relevant statistics. This allows organizations and the state to measure which populations the funding is serving, among other things, and where increased attention may be needed. MCCD and the Minnesota Asset Building Coalition look forward to continuing to work with the chair, the committee, and the agency. Thank you again for the inclusion. That concludes my remarks.
And thank you very much. That was well under 3 minutes. John Dupich from the Minnesota High Tech Association.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is John Dukich with the Minnesota High Tech Association, and I'd like to begin by thanking you for including funding for the SciTech Experience Internship Program. Since this program was established in 2012, we've placed more than almost 1,400 STEM interns at small companies across the state of Minnesota. Continued funding will help us place hundreds of additional interns over the next 2 years and help fill the state's talent pipeline. We'd also like to express our gratitude for including in this bill the Minnesota Innovation Collaborative and state matching funds for companies that receive federal research dollars through the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs. Finally, we'd like to express our concerns regarding the net neutrality provisions in Article 9. The internet is the backbone to Minnesota's technology sector and a conduit to the global economy. We believe that any regulation of the internet should occur at the federal level. There's been too much inconsistency in the rules and policies governing the internet, varying with changes at the Federal Communications Commission. Enacting state-based laws and regulations governing the internet only exacerbates these inconsistencies, creating a patchwork of laws and regulations across states for what is ultimately an interstate and global issue. Inconsistencies in the regulatory framework of the internet hinders the deployment of advanced communication technologies and applications that rely on those technologies. As states like Minnesota work to expand access to broadband through public-private partnerships, we must make sure that we optimize the return on those investments while encouraging the development and deployment of novel technologies. While there are a number of ways to do this, providing regulatory certainty to broadband providers is chief among them, and only an act of Congress can provide this certainty. The net neutrality provisions in this bill seem to add more uncertainty for broadband providers. For example, there are a number of terms in the bill that are introduced but not defined. This includes terms like favor on line 158.11. What does it mean to directly or indirectly favor some traffic over other traffic? Other terms that are unclear are on line 158.22 and include impair, impede, and degrade. Additionally, on line 158.23, it's not clear what constitutes reasonable network management. It's not clear how these terms are to be defined, but their definitions impact how the legislation is implemented. Furthermore, there's no guarantee that whatever definitions are adopted here will be adopted in other states. This uncertainty and possible inconsistency or lack of uniformity in various definitions between states only exacerbates the patchwork nature of this type of state-based legislation. The issue around internet policy and regulation is much broader than any one state and should be addressed at the federal level. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is Marty Seifert.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my name is Marty Seifert. I represent the Minnesota Association for the Centers for Independent Living. We want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the committee for increasing our proposed budget in this biennium, $1.5 million for the biennium, or $750,000 per year, which may not seem a lot in the scheme of the overall budget, but is a huge, huge boost for us who employ people with disabilities across the state of Minnesota. Our 8 centers are very grateful for you, Mr. Chair, for listening to us, for having us into your offices. I think we were able to meet with all members before today since the convening of the legislature. We've had a strong bipartisan support base for our programs for many, many years now. We do look forward to reporting back to you on how the new money will be spent, Mr. Chair. The only concern we had was some language items on page 20 of the bill, which my understanding with staff is that the chair will have an amendment to clear that up. We will be supporting veterans therapy programs, as we've discussed in the past with this committee, particularly focusing on Camp Bliss up in Representative Purcell's district, in providing therapy camp experiences for veterans, as well as direct support for them in their homes back in your districts. The 8 centers look forward to working with you as you head to conference committee, and we want to reiterate our thanks in listening to us and for working with us through the years to serve all people of all abilities.
Thank you. Jamie Taylor from the Commission of Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jamie Taylor. I am deafblind. I'm also a member of the Commission of Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. We know that you have very difficult decisions to make, and we hope that by the time the conference committee is convened, that we have made a stronger case and that our request for an increased funding is included in the final committee report. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you. Monty Hillman from the St. Paul Port Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Chair,
morning.
members of the committee. For the record, my name is Monty Hillman. I'm the Senior Vice President of Real Estate Development at the St. Paul Port Authority. We are also a member of the Economic Development Association of Minnesota. I'm here today and appreciate your time at a previous hearing for allowing us to testify on the need and importance of the Department of Employment and Economic Development's redevelopment account. And we implore you to continue to look for ways to fund this important program through the Omnibus Jobs Bill. We understand currently funding levels are at 0 and understand the desperate attempt to balance the needs of the citizens of Minnesota here, and ask you to continue to find creative ways to fund this account. Since the year 2000, we have used the account to prepare sites and infrastructure that unlock private investment in our neighborhoods. We have used this fund to unlock the home to 24 businesses and nearly 3,000 jobs just in the city of St. Paul. This is equivalent to over $200 million of private investment through just $4 million of state investment. We know that this public investment attracts other financing and investment on very complicated redevelopment projects, which require oftentimes over a dozen different funding sources. This is one of the state's larger and more important tools in the puzzle of infill and redevelopment projects, not just in the core cities. Our colleagues in Red Wing, in Bemidji, in Duluth, and in other communities across the state of Minnesota could very well put this to use and attract investment to their communities as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ann Keisler?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Ann Kilzer, and I'm the director of the Minnesota Association Workforce Boards. So our membership includes the 16 local workforce development boards across the state, which are appointed by local elected officials. And these boards are made up primarily of private industry representatives and are responsible for the strategic investment of employment and training funding in their communities. We also represent the providers of the state and federally funded adult dislocated worker and youth employment training programs. At yesterday's hearing, a question arose regarding the Workforce Development Fund. And as Chair Mahoney and staff described very well, there's a per employee fee paid by employers that goes into the Workforce Development Fund and falls under the jurisdiction of this committee. One aspect of the fund that wasn't mentioned yesterday is that any money not spent by the legislature out of the Workforce Development Fund or the balance of collections for the remainder of the year support the state's dislocated worker program. Because it's a balanced remaining program, services to dislocated workers do not show up on your budget spreadsheets. I do have a handout here that's a House research document that outlines the dislocated worker program.
Why don't I
Excuse me.
add one of the pages, take that and pass it out?
Thank you. And I also have a map of the 16 local workforce development boards, so you can see where your district would lie on that map. So as this document outlines, by statute, 50% of the balance each year goes to the local workforce development areas to provide dislocated worker training or working with employers to provide incumbent worker training. Because it's a statewide program, we serve every county with this state funding. Although the economy continues to be strong, we always advocate that a balance of the funds remain for this important work. We're actually beginning to see an increase in the number of dislocated workers coming in for services. My member in Southeast Minnesota told me this week that they have 4 times the number of dislocated workers this year than they did last year at this point in time. The dislocated worker funds, like the Minnesota Youth Program funds, go out by formula to all 16 workforce development areas, taking into account factors like relative unemployment or underemployment. For both programs, the workforce development boards oversee the strategic investment of these funds and communicate the needs of employers and their communities, what skills are needed, what industries are in demand, what training should be available to ensure the best targeting and use of these funds. We also report to DEED the outcomes of these funds for both the federal and state programs. Employers from all counties pay into the fund, and as a statewide organization of service providers, we appreciate the committee's efforts to balance investments in specific community organizations and programs with investments in statewide formula-based programs like the Dislocated Worker Program to ensure that Minnesota's job seekers and employers in all corners of the state have ongoing access to the employment and training programs they need to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa Heising from the AFL-CIO. Good morning. Please identify yourself for the tape.
Good morning, and hello, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Melissa Heising, and I'm Legislative Director at the Minnesota AFL-CIO. I want to thank the author and committee members for all your work so far. We believe the DE3 amendment reflects and responds to the needs of working people in our state. I particularly want to thank Chair Mahoney for his work on House File 6, which comprises the portion of the amendment that addresses wage theft. This bipartisan, common sense policy reflects the experiences of directly affected workers, employers, and advocates who have been working together for years to address the problem of wage theft in its many forms. Next, the inclusion of House File 5, the Paid Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program, responds to testimony from dozens of working Minnesotans who need to be able to take time off work to care for themselves, a new child or loved one, or to give their employees the ability to do so and make ends meet at the same time. We also want to thank you for hearing and including provisions including earned sick and safe time, the Minnesota Call Center Jobs Act, the meatpacking workers provisions, the PERB board funding, unemployment insurance for school bus contractors, and the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council recommendations. We look forward to wholeheartedly supporting this bill as it makes its way to the floor and to conference committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Otis Sander and Lee Buckley from Ujamaa.
Good morning, Chairman Mahoney, members of the committee. My name is Otis Zanders, the CEO of Ujamaa Place. I come to you briefly this morning on behalf of our board of directors, our staff, our supporters and community partners, but especially the men of Ujamaa to thank you for again including our work into your job growth bill. We appreciate that so much, and also throughout the year, especially you, Chairman Mahoney and Linda Moran and former Chairman Garofalo for their support not only to visit but also to observe our work and to come back and report firsthand the work we're doing to assist this emerging workforce. After the 2016 investment, we went right to work. In 2017, we received the United Way Community Leadership Award. In 2018, the Council of Nonprofits Anti-Racism Award, as well as St. Paul Foundation work on face and race. But it's because of this body's effort to stabilize and work with this emerging workforce. We are very thankful that you've seen our work to be worthy of an increase for this coming year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm just here to echo the thanks and gratitude on behalf
Could
of
you
Ujamaa
identify
Place.
yourself for the tape, please?
Thank you. My name is Lee Buckley, and I'm the Chief of Operations for Ujamaa Place. And I'm here to just echo our thanks and gratitude to all of you for the support of House File 1155. It certainly helps us to continue and expand the great and most difficult work that we're doing with the most disenfranchised group in the state to help them transform lives and also to help them earn income and become citizens and taxpayers in this state. So thank you very much on behalf of Ujamaa Place, its staff, its board of directors, its volunteers, and most importantly, the Ujamaa men.
Thank you. We need to allow the youngest member of the committee to get seated. Next on the agenda is Charlie Van Air. Did I mess it up again?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, Charlie Vanderarty for Metro Cities, which represents the collective interests of cities across the 7-county metropolitan region. This bill has some really good things: a commitment to workforce development, meeting current job training needs, and planning for the future. Job training grants for businesses and workers in the metro, and targeted programs that aim to address disparities. Thank you for those funds. A number of weeks ago, the committee heard from the private sector and the public sector who shared stories of what the state's marquee economic development programs meant for their communities, their tax base, their workers, and opportunities for the future. Mr. Chair, redevelopment is the starting line for a lot of economic development. The state has a program in place to meet opportunities across Minnesota, but there is no funding in this bill. Representative Cagle's bill would have funded 4 rounds of the redevelopment grant program, a program that when it's funded is oversubscribed 2 or 3 times. Many cities have 1 or 2 eligible sites, many on Main Street and valuable intersections, that with funding from this program will renew blocks and neighborhoods and improve the tax base. The Minnesota Investment Fund and Job Creation Fund are how Minnesota helps attract new businesses to Minnesota and help existing businesses grow. Economic development partnerships like Greater MSP work across the world, telling site selectors and businesses to invest in Minnesota. I encourage the committee to add more funds to these essential programs up to the modest levels in Representative Claflin's and Representative Stevenson's bills. DEED makes investments in the cities across the metro region and across the state. Many investments have been made in your cities: Maple Grove, Lakeville, Fairmont, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Metro Cities looks forward to building on the state and local relationship and finding a funding level that shows Minnesota is open for business and ready to invest in its communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is Susan Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, Sue Abderholden, Executive Director of NAMI, Minnesota. As you know, people with mental illnesses have the highest unemployment rate of any disability group, and yet employment is an evidence-based practice that actually helps them in their recovery. 85% of people who with mental illness who are receiving social services are unemployed. We believe that DEED should actually be helping all Minnesotans, particularly those with mental illnesses, address barriers to employment. While we're disappointed that you couldn't fund the one program targeted to help people with serious mental illnesses obtain employment, the IPS program, we're very pleased to see the language requiring DEED to finally look at this issue. We want to identify the barriers to employment and the solutions so that people with mental illnesses can obtain employment, which helps not only their mental health, but actually helps move them out of poverty as well. We will be back next year with those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Smith, Minnesota Credit Union Network.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members, and of course, the littlest and most adorable member. My name is Ryan Smith, and I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota Credit Union Network and the 105 credit unions and the 1.7, almost 1.8 million members they serve in Minnesota. I want to start off by thanking the chair for including just so many provisions that credit unions support in the DE amendment. In Article 9, we'd especially like to thank you for including the language starting on line 159.25 that moves assessments from non-bank financial institutions into the special revenue funds. We hope that can continue to stay in there. We want to continue to ensure that credit unions and banks aren't paying more than their fair share of the regulatory costs incurred by the Commerce Department. We also support the language, including Prepare and Prosper Access Funds to develop the Financial Services Inclusion Program, as well as the money earmarked for the Getting to Work program. We also support Chair Dabney's efforts at protecting consumers, starting on line 161.2 from predatory lenders. And we also support the dollars to help continue the great work that Exodus Lending has undertaken. We have been concerned with some of the provisions of the rewrite of the unclaimed property statutes found in Section 17. We've met with staff from the Department of Commerce several times regarding those concerns, and we want to thank them for their openness and their willingness to continue to work on the concerns excuse me, as the bill continues to move through the process. We would ask if the staff continue to work to address the issues we've outlined and ensure that this statute works for everyone involved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Michael Gore of Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michael Gore. I'm the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters Twin Cities. We were founded back in 1920. Since 1920, we have served over half a million youth in our community. Most recently, in 2018, we served over 4,000 youth in our community. And we want to say thank you very much for your ongoing support of our agency and also recognizing the importance of youth mentoring in our community. As you know, there are so many kids who are faced with adversities, and this program allows our youth to have an opportunity to graduate from high school and pursue a career in technology or as well as 2-year or 4-year institution. Our organization is really focused on evidence-based youth mentoring, and through youth mentoring, we can accomplish many things, which including high school graduation rate. Most recently in 2018, where our overall graduation for kids who are entered in our program have over a graduation rate of 94%. So we want to thank you very much for your ongoing support of Big Brothers Big Sisters, and we also here to ask you for your continuous support because there's a many gap that still exists in our youth. I think it will be fair for us to say that all of you who are here as a part of the committee are here because there's someone really cared along the way in your career trajectory enough to make sure that you are pointed in the right direction. Without youth mentoring, I think a lot of our kids in our community are certainly faced with many, many challenges. So here to say thank you. I know there are a lot of worthy projects you're weighing, and we just want to say thank you very much for your ongoing support of Big Brothers Big Sisters and future support that we expect as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you for your comments. Dr. Joe Hobart, American Indian, President of the American Indian OIC.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. How Watakiwasin Unshimailo Washte, Dr. Joe Hobart. I greet you in my traditional family language of Lakota, Unkpapa Lakota from Standing Rock Nation. I currently serve as President and CEO of the American Indian OIC. The OIC stands for the Opportunities and Industrialization Center. Founded in 1979, we specialize in workforce development and education. Came here today to testify to the importance and the need of the ongoing appropriations for the OICs, as well as what is known as the equities investment. As you are probably well aware, has been focused in the media, the great need of our community in the Minneapolis area, as typified by the Wall of Forgotten Natives or the massive homeless encampment, speaks to the tip of the iceberg of the manifold challenges that our organization is quite familiar with, that we work with. Over the past years, with this investment in our community through our organization, we have put over nearly 300 people into jobs in the IT sector as well as the service industry, with a median wage of about $15 an hour. I believe there's a handout going around with this data as well. The importance of these appropriations enables resources to come into our community. Traditionally, resources into our community have been denied under the auspices of equality. When you face generational disparities, such as our community, the American Indian community in the Twin Cities area, equality doesn't fit the bill. We need a disproportionate investment in order to undo the harm and damage that has been done to our community. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you here today. One note, I just noticed for housekeeping, I see my name on the list twice there, so I'll go ahead and roll it all into this testimony right here, right now. And then also encourage you to support this ongoing investment for communities of color and culturally specific communities who are starving for these resources, which was the intent and purpose of the equities investment that was made by the Governor Dayton administration 2 years ago. Thank you for this time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Cam Winton, Minnesota Telecom Alliance.
Chair Mahoney, members, I'm Cam Winton with the Dorsey & Whitney firm on behalf of the Minnesota Telecom Alliance. And Chair Mahoney, it's been an age since I've had the pleasure of appearing before you here, so nice to see you again, sir. The Minnesota Telecom Alliance is comprised of telecom providers across the state of all sizes. And I'm here on MTA's behalf today to express our opposition to provisions in the bill that would put requirements on the state when purchasing or funding internet service. Those provisions are at page 157.20 in the DE amendment. Two key reasons why the Minnesota Telecom Alliance opposes these requirements and these mandates on the state. First of all, regulation of the internet has been a federal level thing. It almost is too simple to be worth mentioning, but data flows across state lines. And what we've seen in the United States is that when states try to regulate the flow of data on the internet, it doesn't work well. They end up in court. It gets tied up in challenges. And we have no reason to think that things will be different here in our beloved state if the state tried to get into the business of regulating the internet. So this is a federal issue, and we encourage the state of Minnesota to recognize that fact. And secondly, the Minnesota Telecom Alliance, as I said, it's comprised of telecom providers across the state. And we are the folks in the private sector who are partnering with you all, with the public sector, to build border-to-border broadband internet service. I think as I look around the table, just about everybody here is a supporter of the border-to-border broadband internet grant program. And on behalf of MTA, we very much appreciate that support. So please hear this. This is a chilling effect. If this bill were to become law, these provisions were to become law, it would have a chilling effect on the private sector companies that want to partner with the state to deploy broadband internet. There's an attempt at comfort language, and that's at page 159.13. So I want to give credit where it's due to the attempt at the comfort language, but respectfully, it's cold comfort. And my understanding is there might be an amendment forthcoming on that comfort language, and from what I understand of the forthcoming amendment, well, again, it's well-intentioned, it also doesn't provide comfort. So in short, it's a federal issue, and these provisions would chill the private investment in border-to-border internet across our state that we all here in this room support. And so we ask you to oppose the provisions that start at page 157.20. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anna Boroff, Minnesota Cable Communications Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Anna Boroff, and I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Cable Communications Association, and I am here to respectfully share our concerns about the net neutrality provisions in the bill. Minnesota cable companies serve customers in every corner of the state, metro, suburban, and rural. They represent all sizes of ISPs, small, large, mid-size, serving over 1.4 million customers in the state. For those of you who have not heard this bill before, I want to be very clear that all Minnesota cable companies strictly adhere to the principles of net neutrality. These include no blocking of legal content, no throttling of traffic, no unfair discrimination, and transparent consumer practices. We remain committed to these principles, and we have communicated our strong commitment to net neutrality to our customers. These commitments are also binding and enforceable by the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission. Much of the advocacy and support of what was House File 136 focused less on the substance of the controversial portions of this bill and has instead featured unhelpful rhetoric about the long debunked myths of alleged net neutrality violations and the ISP's lobbying efforts at the federal level. Our efforts to ensure that federal regulatory agencies and Congress resolve this complex issue the right way should not be mistaken for our opposition to net neutrality. I want to be clear. We continue to ask Congress to enshrine net neutrality principles into federal law. I want to give you some examples of why this bill is harmful to broadband providers, even if we already abide by these principles. First, as you've heard, data travels without regard for state lines. Several of our members cross multiple state borders. What is deemed as reasonable network management in one state could be entirely different in another, making the case again for a unified national approach as the best path to ensure consistent net neutrality principles. Minnesota cable companies have many ways in which we do business with the state. One example is with the contracts we have with DEED and the Office of Broadband to partner in providing rural broadband to unserved areas of Minnesota. With this bill, member companies would be significantly concerned about applying for future state broadband grants or doing business with state and local governments. We have heard that Representative Stevenson plans to offer an amendment tomorrow which will attempt to address the broadband issue. The version of the amendment we saw was problematic and confusing. It will not accomplish what the author intends, but will instead create net neutrality zones across the state with one set of rules for rural areas and another for urban areas. The state-by-state regulatory patchwork favored by this bill is already bad enough. Another reason why this bill is problematic is the contract clawback language. If an ISP is found to be violating a net neutrality principle, does the phrase "all revenues earned under the contract" mean that the state can claw back the amount of the contract, or does it mean all revenue earned from our customers as a result of the contract would be clawed back? If this bill would become law and we were accused to be violating it, we would be faced with significant financial penalties. I will skip down since I'm getting the 30-second line. But I do want to mention that this bill is likely to be challenged in federal court as being federally preempted. Both the state of California and the state of Vermont have enacted net neutrality laws, and both those states were immediately sued and those cases were suspended. There's also some confusion about the enforcement responsibilities under the bill. The Department of Commerce has enforcement authorities, but also it is unclear if ISPs have a contract with other agencies. Those agencies would then be responsible for investigating net neutrality provisions. So I will wrap up and say that our industry continues to work for legislation at the federal level that will put into place net neutrality laws. It's not simple. We know it's complicated, but we don't think that this means that the state should step into this complicated fray and make the problem more difficult to resolve. So thank you for the committee's time. That's the fastest I've ever talked, so thank you.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate your comment. Anna Odegaard.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Anna Odegaard, and I am the legislative advocate for the Minnesota Asset Building Coalition. We're a statewide coalition of nonprofit organizations that work directly with low-income Minnesotans. I'd like to thank the committee for including the Getting to Work bill in the Omnibus budget bill. In this committee yesterday, Mr. Chair, you talked about how going to work and bringing home a paycheck that covers the bills gives people confidence and dignity. I couldn't agree more. For people who need a car to get to work or whose job requires them to drive, the Getting to Work bill helps them earn that paycheck and the dignity that comes with it. I'd also like to thank the committee for including the Spark program in the Omnibus bill. This committee heard testimony on that bill from Katie Kimball, who owns the Twin Cities Trapeze Center. She talked about how the business technical assistance that she received from Women Venture helped turn her from a trapeze artist into an entrepreneur. Those were her words. The Spark program supports organizations like Women Venture that help entrepreneurs launch successful businesses that support their families and contribute to their communities and to the economy. Thank you so much for recognizing the importance of those two bills.
Thank you for your comments. Next on the agenda is Brian Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Boys and Girls Clubs from around the state once again. I am Brian Donaldson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Alliance for Boys and Girls Clubs. I'm here today to first and foremost thank the Chair and the members who have supported our request for funding from this committee for the Boys and Girls Clubs' ongoing career and college readiness programs. And we are forever grateful that the Chair has seen fit to include the Boys and Girls Clubs by name in his budget, and we're thankful for the continued support here of the members and especially our co-author, Representative Zhang. As you may remember from our testimony in committee, the Boys and Girls Clubs serve more than 47,000 kids in more than 50 locations statewide. Of those youth, 69% qualify for free and reduced lunch, and 70% are of minority backgrounds. We truly serve kids who need us the most. Our goal is that all our youth graduate with a plan for the future. Funding through this committee has consistently helped us to provide career readiness programs to reach our goal, as well as the state's goal of creating a prepared, diverse workforce for the future. In the more than decade and a half that we have received funding from the state budget for our career readiness programs, we have seen consistent gains and success in preparing our youth for the future. For example, just yesterday, more than 160 teens from our clubs from around the state attended a job fair at the Jerry Gamble Boys and Girls Club in North Minneapolis. More than 40 trade associations, employers, and colleges met with youth about opportunities for their future. Much of the success is due in large part to our collaborative partnership with DEED staff as well as our business and trade association partners. We are very appreciative of the trust this committee and DEED places in the Boys and Girls Clubs to prepare a large number of diverse, capable youth for the workforce. We recognize the challenges of putting together a budget and look forward to working with the Chair throughout the rest of the session to make sure the Boys and Girls Clubs can continue to expand workforce services and meet the needs of kids across the state. As always, we invite you to visit a club in or near your community to meet and see our youth in action. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I'll get there. Next on the agenda is Melanie Baha. Did I pronounce that correctly? The last time I had this much trouble, actually I'm not having that much trouble today, but the last time was when I had my upper respiratory cough, and the doctor gave me some really good coating cough medicine, and everybody laughed at me when I tried to pronounce anybody's name. So getting closer.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you. My name is Melody Bahan. Thank you for allowing me to testify this morning. I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Film and TV, which is our state's nonprofit film commission, one of only two in the country that is a nonprofit organization and not a state agency. Our mission is to advance Minnesota's economy by promoting and supporting the state's production industry. As part of that mission, we administer the state's production incentive program. This year, we are working hard to expand Minnesota's incentive program to allow us to compete with other states for film and TV production. This expansion will bring back jobs we've lost to other states, create new jobs, and bring millions of dollars in new spending to Minnesota. Before I began my tenure as Executive Director in July of 2017, the funding appropriation for our operations was split evenly between Jobs and Economic Development and Government Finance. On Thursday evening, we learned of House File 2750, a bill that would eliminate the half of our operations funding from the Government Finance bill for the coming biennium. We understand the intent of Representative Nelson, who believes that the appropriation should be in the jobs bill. But unfortunately, there was no warning given to our organization, to DEED, or to this committee, and therefore no alternative funding was put in place in House File 2208. The result is that without an amendment to the appropriation for Minnesota Film and TV, our operations funding is reduced by half, just as we are attempting to expand the program, including the development of a workforce training program. We know that we are not the only organization in this situation, although we are perhaps the only one before this committee. Minnesota Film and TV's unique position as a 501c3 is particularly relevant in discussing operating budgets, as we perform the same functions as offices that are state agencies around the country. The operations appropriation we receive from the state has been $326,000, and we are not asking for an increase, although we wouldn't say no. These funds are supplemented by private fundraising to cover the remainder of our expenses. To give you a basis for comparison, according to our research, other states budget between $600,000 up to as much as $1.5 million for the operations of their film offices. We think having a nonprofit film office is uniquely Minnesotan, and we are proud to partner with the state to create jobs and economic development. But we can't fulfill our mission if our budget is cut by 50%. I urge the committee to work toward restoring the operations funding for Minnesota Film and TV to its full amount. I appreciate your time. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you for your comments. Sia Her, Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. Good morning. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to comment this morning on House File 2209, the Omnibus Jobs and Economic Development Bill. For the record, my name is Sia Her, and I am the Executive Director of the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. As most of you know, this is an executive branch office created by the legislature in 1985, charged with the responsibility of advising both the executive and legislative branches of government on behalf of Minnesota's Asian American and Pacific Islander community. This morning, I have two simple messages to deliver. First, our council supports the governor's recommendation to restore the Southeast Asian Competitive Grants Program, which is a program administered by DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, for the purpose of the community members here in this room today. So restoring that program to its full funding of $2 million for the biennium. The Southeast Asian Equity Grants Program is essential to the state's effort to reduce economic and other disparities because it targets recent refugees and immigrants who are not well served by other DEED programs. Secondly, we have heard a variety of concerns as well as support for equity provisions in House File 2208. Mr. Chair, and I'm speaking to these provisions as they are laid out in the DE amendment. As the advisor to you on behalf of Minnesota's fastest growing cultural community and a community that is refugee experience majority, our council looks forward to working very closely with you and members of the committee, DEED, and our community organizations to further refine a jobs bill that best meets everyone's key priorities. And Mr. Chair and members of the committee, that is all from me this morning. Thank you so much for your time.
Just a minute here. Would you take it upon yourself to get your other ethnic groups together and call Michael and set up a time for next Monday or Tuesday or whatever? I'd like to figure out a little bit more on how to untie this knot.
You have my commitment to do so, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Oh, I'm not even going to try the Korean organization. I can always get your first name. It's the rest of it that gets me in trouble. So thank you for coming today.
Thanks. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and member of the committee. For the record, my name is Etaku, and I'm one of the co-executive director of the Korean Organization of Minnesota. KOM strongly support locating the full $2 million to the Southeast Asian Disparity Grant. KOM is a nonprofit organization that serves over 3,000 individuals every year. Most of who we serve are from Burma, which include Korean and Korean communities. As a new immigrant community, they face high levels of language, education, and employment barriers. Majority of who seek employment services from KOM do not have a U.S. high school diploma or GED and are functioning at second grade English reading level. This means many of the community are sidelined into minimum wage, low-scale employment that doesn't provide family-sustaining wages, and increases this community reliance on the public benefit programs. Mainstream training programs targeting low-income communities are typically inaccessible to Korean community because eligibility requirements often set as grade 6 or higher reading level or require high school or GED. With the support over the past few years from Southeast Asia Equity Grant, KOM has been able to develop and run our own successful soldering certification training that incorporates intensive adult-based education support to help low literacy participants to be successful. Most participants exiting from soldering programs have entered related employment within 2 and 3 weeks. So we ask that the committee move to support fully funding the Southeast Asia Disparity Grant so that organizations like KOM can continue to reduce barriers for Minnesotans, marginalized communities, and increase access to economic and employment opportunities to create a more equitable state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next on the agenda is Irene Koo.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Irene Gao. I'm with the League of Minnesota Cities. The League is a membership organization that comprises 833 of 853 cities in the state. Members, in your packets, you should have a letter from the League that illustrates and articulates the thoughts that we have and concerns that we have with the Omnibus bill. On the back side of the letter actually has the provisions that I want to talk about today, which is related to the retainage provisions found in Article 8, Sections 1 and 24. We have been, since the bill's introduction, we've been working with the bill author as well as the proponents and stakeholders, and know that we're committed to continuing this work. About a week and a half ago, we had suggested language that would balance hopefully what the proponents had brought up in terms of their concerns, as well as ensure that cities can still have responsible use of taxpayer money when it comes to public construction projects. But in deference to the bill author, we have not yet drafted an amendment, but we'll continue to work with stakeholders and hope for a future amendment. The way that it works in public construction projects, as well as generally in the private, is that the city serves as what's called an owner. The owner then contracts with the general contractor on large projects, who then work with subcontractors. The subcontractors can really range from the person who digs the hole, maybe puts up the frame, the electrical work, all the way to the landscaping that's done at the very end. The city actually doesn't have a direct relationship with the subcontractors. Retainage is actually a tool to ensure that this whole project is complete. According to state law, it's a maximum of 5% that can be withheld. But as we've heard in testimony and as we continue to work with stakeholders, we can appreciate that subcontractors who come early in the project, who maybe dig that hole, are having that retainage held on them for a very long time. The provisions in the bill, unfortunately, don't completely address the subcontractors' concerns, but does take away and could really impair the city's ability to be responsible with taxpayer funds, especially when it comes to these public projects. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee, for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next on the agenda is Gary Thaden. I'm sure I've got it.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Gary Thaden. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Minnesota Mechanical Contractors Association and for the Minnesota Contractors of the National Electrical Contractors Association. I'm here to thank you for the retainage provisions in your bill. Contrary to the previous testifier, we think that this is a great provision that the chairman has put in. I represent 20 different organizations and 3 trade unions which think that this is a good provision. It simply gets us paid. The law says we're supposed to get paid our retainage, but there is no date as to when we're supposed to be paid, and that's what these provisions would do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Bert Johnson, North Central State Regional Council of Carpenters. Good morning. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members, for letting me come to speak on this topic.
I'm here today to testify
Could you please
in favor
identify
of...
yourself for the tape?
I'm sorry, my name is Bert Johnson. I'm General Counsel for the North Central States Regional Council of Carpenters. I know that's a mouthful. So I'm here to testify today in favor of Article 5 of the Jobs Bill today related to wage theft. So right now, our civil and administrative system is very well equipped to assist, train, and even mildly penalize employers who might occasionally short a worker some pay. However, our system right now, civil and administrative, is not adequately equipped to hold accountable those employers whose entire business model is premised on the idea that they will profit from cheating their workforce, both through non-payment of taxes, workers' compensation premiums, even human trafficking. Nowhere is this more evident than in the current case of Ricardo Batras, who's being prosecuted in Hennepin County for workers' comp fraud and human trafficking. Batras enabled contractors to gain a competitive advantage by not paying taxes, work comp, or overtime. He let his workers work in unsafe conditions. He intercepted a vehicle carrying one of his workers to the hospital who had 3 broken vertebrae so that he could avoid having the worker file a work comp claim against his carrier. Batras had been investigated and fined by the administrative system in the past, and then ultimately was charged with trafficking. Nor does it better show that we have a gap between light level, low level enforcement and an ultimate penalty of prosecuting somebody for work comp fraud and trafficking. What Article 5 does is it enables the Department of Labor and Industry, among others, to adequately enforce in an upscale, sort of scaling up the enforcement as it fits sort of either the penalty or the crime. This bill does three main things. It provides resources to the administrative system to prevent further abuses by stopping wage theft before it becomes trafficking, before it becomes felony type trafficking or wage theft. It gives the Attorney General the ability to take on the more complex cases that our administrative system is not set up to take on. And probably most importantly, it treats wage theft like any other kind of theft. So why should an employer who steals from their employees be treated differently than anybody else who steals from any other Minnesotan? It's time that we right that wrong. So I really appreciate your allowing me to come here and speak before you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for praising my bill. Next on the agenda is Paul Wirtz from AT&T Minnesota, president of AT&T Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Paul Wirtz. I'm the state president for AT&T Minnesota. I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, to talk on the net neutrality portions of the bill and our opposition. I represent more than 1,500 employees around the state of Minnesota, and if you allow me a moment of indulgence, that at 8:40 this morning we just received news that AT&T has the fastest network in the country according to an Ookla speed test for the first quarter. So very proud of that, and that comes with a lot of investment, a lot of hard work from our people in and around the state and the country, certainly. Let me start out by saying that AT&T is committed to an open internet. We do not block websites. We do not censor online content. We do not throttle, discriminate, or degrade internet traffic, period. We have publicly committed to these principles for over 10 years now, and we will continue to abide by them in order to provide our customers with the open internet experience they've come to expect. These commitments are published on our website. They were reiterated by our chairman, Randall Stevenson, in an open letter last year in January. And these commitments are already enforceable by the Minnesota Attorney General, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Federal Communications Commission. We oppose the net neutrality provisions of House File 2208 because we believe Congress, not the states, ought to end the debate over the internet regulations once and for all by writing new laws that govern the internet and protect consumers. Federal legislation would not only ensure consumer rights are protected, but it would provide consistent rules of the road for all internet companies across websites, content, devices, and applications. I'd like to echo the sentiments of my colleagues that testified earlier with respect to the possibility of amending the language for the broadband grant program. I can give you my 5 years experience on the previous broadband task force, which really oversaw the creation of the fund, the program, staffing of the office, et cetera, as part of that process. This grant program is becoming the emulation of the country. I was just on a call with my colleagues in Illinois, and the governor there is looking to build a state broadband grant program similar to Minnesota's. We should not be going down the path of saddling the grant program with a regulatory requirement that is going to be well addressed in federal court or at the FCC or in Congress. The idea that we would have grant recipients, large companies or small companies, then in some segments of their delivery area where they would provide that grant service, that would not be subject to a net neutrality requirement, but then other parts of the state, they would have to abide by some net neutrality. It's really going back to, dating myself, what we used to call the local area telephone access lines, where you had boundaries and the balkanization of telecom service. Remember long distance and how if you called a community across the road, it could be a toll. We don't need to saddle the broadband grant program. Let's let Congress decide this, and certainly the courts will be involved as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and I wish Washington wasn't as broken as it is.
I would agree with that. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is Tess Rice from the Minnesota Bankers Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Tess Rice. I'm General Counsel for the Minnesota Bankers Association. We appreciate the opportunity to briefly comment on a couple of items in this bill. We're a trade association that represents 96% of the banks in Minnesota, from the largest to the very smallest. Thank you for the inclusion of the Department of Commerce Special Revenue Fund language in this bill. We believe it will go a long way to make sure that all financial institutions are paying fairly for their regulatory services. The other thing we wanted to comment on is the unclaimed property rewrite that's included in this bill. We have many concerns with that language. We've communicated them to the department. We have their commitment that they will work with us and the other stakeholders, and in fact, we're meeting with them tomorrow. So we hope to come up with something that works well for both our members and for their customers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Bradley Peterson. Better hurry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Bradley Peterson, here today on behalf of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. I'd like to briefly comment on 3 items. First, I would like to thank the chair for the inclusion of $1.35 million for the very successful job training incentive program. We talked a little bit about this in committee last week. Second, I need to express concern about a portion of the bill contained in Article 1, Subdivision 2, Paragraph A of the bill that creates for DEED a discretionary bucket of funding of $9.35 million to potentially be allocated amongst 4 programs. One of these programs is the very successful Greater Minnesota Business Development Public Infrastructure Grant Program, BDPI for short. Rather than specifically directing how these dollars should be spent, the language of the bill leaves it to the commissioner's discretion amongst the 4 programs, including giving him the discretion to allocate $0 to any given program. We believe that the program should be funded as it traditionally has been, as a standalone program with a specific amount of money, and we request that this committee adhere to the governor's recommendation of $1.787 million. Finally, Mr. Chair, and most importantly, I need to touch on child care. We are grateful that this bill includes $2.8 million for child care, but we are again very concerned about the process for distributing these funds. For some portion of the funds, we would prefer the approach laid out in House File 422 that would distribute funds across the 6 Minnesota Initiative Foundations to engage in activities to increase the availability of child care in their service areas. A direct appropriation to the MIFs would have 3 advantages. First, it would ensure that the funds would be deployed more quickly rather than making the MIFs go through an application, evaluation, and award process, which based on our understanding could double the time it takes to get money into the field. Second, because of the geographic coverage of the MIFs, a direct appropriation would ensure that every corner of Greater Minnesota would get funding. And third, the MIFs are built to be responsive to the needs of the communities they serve and are therefore in the best position to tailor programs that will work for their home regions. Finally, the language gives broad discretion again to DEED. Again, by the very language of the bill at lines 5.10 and 5.11, DEED could give $0 to the MIFs, And while we have no reason to believe that they would not favorably act on grant requests from the MIFs, allowing the possibility of $0 is an unacceptable level of risk of uncertainty when it comes to addressing this critical issue. Because we all believe, Mr. Chair, that addressing the child care shortage in Greater Minnesota is of critical importance, we would urge the body to make this commitment unambiguous. To that end, we request that this committee support a direct appropriation in the bill to the 6 MIFs of no less than $250,000 each for a total of $1.5 million to address this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Members, I'm going to take a, once I figure out how to stop my phone, I'm going to jump around in the list here. I'm going to bring up the Hmong American Partnership because we have a lot of young people, and I'm sure they're missing school and they need to get their education.
Spring break.
Oh, man. You probably shouldn't have said that because then I would have just, you know, trying to get you up here and out of here. I'm going to bring you up and have you make your comments, and next on the list will be Mike Nguyen. Please. You can both come up, one after the other. Good morning. Who would like to go first?
I could go, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Chair, members, I'm Mike Nguyen. I'm the president and CEO of Emerge Community Development, an organization with a consistent track record of success in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis for the past 20 years. And I personally have over 3 decades in doing economic development and opportunities work in our community. I'm here to express concern and about the decision to eliminate equity appropriations that were launched for very urgent and well-documented reasons 3 years ago in our community. In 2016, Emerge took on a role as lead agency in an equity-funded collaborative, the Unity Opportunity Collaborative, an effort of Emerge, Sabathany Center, Stair Step Foundation, and the Minneapolis Urban League to address employment, income, and educational disparities impacting Minnesotans of African descent and other communities of color. Building on the long-term experience and trusted presence of our organizations in geographically key areas of North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, and Cedar Riverside communities, neighborhoods with the lowest household income levels, the highest levels of unemployment in the state. They are the ground zero of Minnesota's racial and economic disparities. In spite of some challenges we indeed had in starting up a very large and complex project from July of 2016 to March of 2018, our equity funded program served more than 1,800 individuals, and we helped 341 people achieve an industry recognized workforce credential. We also helped 476 people gain a job placement, significantly overall surpassing nearly all the major outcomes of the grant. For Emerge, this funding helped us grow our work in North Minneapolis, as well as launch the Cedar Riverside Opportunity Center, which we are an anchor partner in 2017, and we surpassed all of the goals in the first year operation of that program. However, throughout the time, we struggled to get DEED to help us build and coordinate these efforts. The overlaid process didn't do well to understand the work that we were doing and trying to accomplish, and nor did it let us or our partners grow our work without relative punitive oversight. There was a real lack of constructive problem solving, which overall thwarted our work, but we kept working. And most often, our experience as a group of organizations surpassed the agency's experience. And at the time, at no time in the process did we refuse accountability or transparency, and we invite any conversation about that. After what was a long and painful impasse, we ultimately settled our disagreement with the agency, and we mutually agreed to reset and restore our working relationships. And our partners are currently organizing to relaunch this work as we speak. but taking away this funding severely undermines an opportunity to fix a past wrong and allow important work to resume. We want to urge you to reconsider, and we thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Nyajong, and good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you our concern related to the Omnibus bill. My name is Gaju Gongta. I am the Chief Deputy Officer of Hmong American Partnership, and Mr. Chair, I live in your district. I'm here today to talk about the missed opportunity for Minnesotan when Asian Minnesotan, and specifically Southeast Asian population, are left behind in employment training. But before I begin, I would like all of our CSC, HAP staff, community members, community leaders, and client present today to please stand up. Mr. Chair and community member, these individuals are a tiny representation of the over 25,000 community members we serve each year, from employees to business owners to clients and to partners. Thank you. And yes, we are on spring break, but many of our families took time off to be here today, so I wanted to thank our families for being here. Since 1990, we have placed over thousands of people into jobs, moving them from poverty to self-sufficiency. We have, over the last 2 decades, garnished the credibility and trust of employers and businesses. We are also an accountability organization that has managed millions of dollars at the federal, state, and county levels. Today, we face one of the largest workforce shortages, and yet this bill neglects a very important population that has grown exponentially above all the other population in Minnesota in the last 10 years, and that is the Southeast Asian community. People from these communities remain the poorest and have the highest rate of unemployment and underemployment. Yet there is such a great potential within our community. The Hmong community alone has over 50% of population under the age of 24. You'll see today we have a lot of little one here. That's over 40,000 future workers. The Southeast Asian community needs jobs and has an array of people ready who can be trained to fill these jobs. The historical legislation of 2016 has authorized equity grant funding was to help make real equitable change in the people that needs them the most by investing in the community organization that reflect the cultural and linguistic needs of the community they serve. As such, the Southeast Asian Community Competitive Equity Grant was to benefit Southeast Asian community members by directly supporting organization that has the cultural capacity and experience in workforce to provide job training and skill set. And please note, having a competitive grant process does not equate to an equitable grant process. We are here today to offer alternative solution to the problem. Mr. Chair and committee members, we want you to consider a direct appropriation of the Southeast Asian Equity Funds to a culturally specific Southeast Asian organization that has the cultural capacity and experience in workforce development. We also ask that you consider restoring the Southeast Asian Equity Grant back to its original $2 million. Together, HAP and the state of Minnesota can grow our future workforce and make Minnesota business successful while fueling Minnesota economy. As a legislator, you can make the difference when you invest in the Southeast Asian community through direct appropriation of and restoring the Southeast Asian Equity Fund. On behalf of my organization, the communities and business we partner with daily, we look forward to working with you all to continue making this state a great place to live, to work, and to play. Watchao, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next on the agenda is David Schaefer.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm David Schaefer with the Minnesota Solar Energy Industries Association. We're a 501c6 nonprofit trade group, and we represent about 110 solar companies throughout the state. I'm here today to talk about the underlying bill 2208 before it was amended, that in its Article 4. What this would have done is it would have required that all solar installers that put solar on people's houses would also be residential building contractors in addition to electrical contractors. The reason why this is important is there was a company in Minnesota, Able Energy, they're now defunct, that took people's deposits and then never delivered on their solar arrays. If they had also been electrical contractors and residential building contractors, those customers could have accessed the residential building contractor recovery fund and been made whole or at least better off. Because Able was not a residential building contractor, these customers got nothing. So There has been some bills in the past that would seek to retroactively require that fund pay for these customers. We're not here asking for that today. What we'd like to see, though, is that all residential building contractors that do solar, well, all solar installers be residential building contractors and electrical contractors going forward. It's not every day an industry comes to ask to be regulated, but this isn't that big of a deal for our members. Many of them already are residential building contractors. All it is about $500 every other year, and you have to have someone on staff that's passed a test. So our members are ready to take this on and to make sure that nothing like Able ever happens again. So we hope that this committee will consider amending that Article 4 into this bill here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Next is Propel Nonprofit.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kate Barr, the president of Propel Nonprofits, formerly called Nonprofits Assistance Fund, a nonprofit that provides a wide range of training, consulting, financing, and leadership support for nonprofits in Minnesota. I'm joined today by one of our grantees for the program, and you'll hear from her in a minute. As the leader of an organization that focuses on building strong nonprofits to provide essential and critical services for our community, I know the importance and challenges facing Minnesota nonprofits, and I thank you for including ongoing funding for the Nonprofits Assistance Fund in this bill. And with an appropriation from the state in 2017, we created a grant program to build the infrastructure and organizational capacity of small, culturally specific nonprofit organizations that primarily serve historically underserved cultural communities. By helping to make these nonprofits stronger, the communities they serve benefit from expanded programs and support. And the nonprofit grantees have made great progress in building organizational systems and capacity and have been able to hire additional staff and reach more people in their communities. The nonprofit grantee recipients are located around the state, including St. Paul and Minneapolis, South St. Paul, Faribault, Bemidji, Detroit Lakes, Moorhead, and Nett Lake. I'm pleased to be here today to ask for your support to continue this program. Minnesota is home to many well-established and sizable nonprofits delivering high-quality services. Smaller, community-based nonprofits are equally important and valuable to reach people around the state. The number of nonprofits led by and serving communities of color has been growing, reflecting the state's demographics and the value of diverse leadership in communities. Culturally specific nonprofits are employers whose capacity to serve and meet their needs within their community are unique and particularly responsive to communities. They also play a role of building the talent pipeline for people of color and indigenous people. The organizations have used the grants to support their infrastructure, staffing, and build operational systems. Grant recipients include organizations as diverse as the Somali American Community Radio in Minneapolis, Irreducible Grace Foundation in St. Paul, Minnesota Indian Business Alliance in Detroit Lakes, and Family Values for Life in St. Paul, who you'll hear from in a minute. We've held these organizations to a high standard for fiscal management, reporting, and policies, and they've met those standards and strengthened their organizations. I ask for your support to continue to invest in culturally specific organizations. They're powerful contributors to the state's economic vitality in addressing disparities and strengthening community health. Your support of this bill will strengthen the state of Minnesota and communities. And I'm pleased to have you hear from one of our grantees.
Good morning. I'm Shatika Flowers, Executive Director of Family Values for Life. We serve 2 generations of a single-family household on the east side, and this year have been able to expand to the Midway area of St. Paul. Our program serves single mothers and their children. For the children, we have programming year-round, and that is after-school programming, summer camps for every week of the summer, and then a back-to-school event where last year we gave out 2,760 backpacks filled with supplies. For the parents, we offer financial literacy classes, parenting classes, workforce readiness and employment opportunities, as well as physical fitness and healthy eating in the home. what we've been able to do with this grant is expand our programming by building capacity, and that allowed us to move into the Midway area with a partner on that side of town. It also allowed us to add a new program over the summer called Bridges Out of Poverty that really takes a deeper look at poverty and the mindset, and to help change the minds of the folks that we serve. This grant is absolutely needed, and I hope that you would continue to support nonprofits in that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Members of the committee, we have 4 testifiers left at 3 minutes. We would probably have to go 5 to 8 minutes over. Are people willing to do that so that it's unlikely we would have to come this afternoon? All right. A show of hands there. The Children's Defense Fund. Eric? Yeah. You can keep it under 3 minutes. You'll probably get a lot more help from you.
I'll try and go less than that. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Eric McConkey. I'm the Policy and Legislative Affairs Director for the Children's Defense Fund of Minnesota. Here in strong support of paid family and medical leave that's included in this bill. 80% of children have both of their parents in the workforce at the time of their birth, and 1 in 4 women return to their jobs only 2 weeks after giving birth. This means that the average cost of infant care in Minnesota is about $310 a week. To cover this, most parents either have to leave the workforce altogether to care for their child, cobble together some form of friend or family care, or try and access child care assistance through the state. Paid family leave is by far the most cost-effective for both the family and the state when comparing all of these scenarios, and this is why we're strongly in support of paid family and medical leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Then we have Wayne Wazliski.
Mr. Chair, members, Wayne Waslowski with the Department of Administration, here to speak related to the retainage provisions in the bill, and I want to echo the concerns expressed by the League of Cities. Retainage is a very important tool for ensuring that construction projects are completed, fully completed, and ensuring a responsible stewardship of taxpayer dollars. It's a challenge today to get projects completed. After you get to substantial completion, get everybody back and get all the work completed. And this is an industry-wide tool across the country, retainage is, and we think we do a responsible job of managing that. And we do share the goals that have been expressed about prompt payment and getting early subs paid out on a timely basis. And we, again, think we do a responsible job with that, but we also think that there's hopefully some language that all the parties can agree to that strikes the right balance. The current language as it sits today, we don't think strikes that right balance. We think it compromises the responsible stewardship of taxpayer dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Nancy Gurney on the list. That is the only one that I have on the list at this point. Are there anybody else, or is there anyone else or any organization that wishes to testify? Or no, there'll be a couple more. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Mahoney and Representative Cagle for sponsoring our bill. I'm Nancy Gurney. I'm President of Opportunity Services. We've been employing people with severe disabilities in competitive integrated jobs since 1986. I want to explain why this section 16 in your bill is so important. Since WIOA has passed, there are many more people with disabilities graduating from high school and expecting to obtain competitive integrated employment in their communities. Businesses are ready to engage, and this section is just extremely important. One of the other things it does is creates an outcome-based payment system, so you're paying for the training and a job for a person with a disability. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the people who can't speak as eloquently as hopefully I can to this bill of why it's important to include people with disabilities in active, gainful employment in their communities. Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I think there was 2 people who testified. Why don't you come up, sir, and then why don't you come on down, ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. I am Tony Tolliver from the Center of Economic Inclusion. I'm here today to talk about the equity grants, and I'd like to ask you to restore the funding. Our program, which is called North at Work, is designed to help African American men who are severely underemployed or unemployed in North Minneapolis with career pathways, work, and we can't continue to do this work without you. Just to give you a few statistics, because I know we're under the gun, 46% of the men, and we've served 2,500 men since this began, have a high school diploma or GED. 50% of them have unstable housing. 60% of them are 100% below the poverty level, and 65% of them have criminal convictions. What that means is, even though we're in this economy where there's plenty of jobs, the people that we serve aren't working. And we are disrupting the system by having deep relationships with multiple partners who do this work with us. We also work with employers. We work at the C-suite level. We work with middle managers who do the hiring, and we work with recruiters because we know that all 3 represent 3 different levels of gatekeepers at companies. It's important for us to do this work this way because we know the policies, procedures, the hiring, and the retention are all important, and the dollars from the equity grant help us do this work. So we ask that you restore the equity grant so we can continue. We're working in a space unlike others, in a collaboration unlike many others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Please identify yourself for the tape and proceed.
Sure. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Bailey Belter. I'm the Youth Policy Manager at the Minnesota Alliance with Youth. You may be familiar with us with the Minnesota Youth Council program, but I am here on behalf of our other program, which is AmeriCorps Promise Fellows, which wasn't included in this budget, but we would like to make one last push to encourage you to fund our request. And I'll summarize what I was going to say, but the House file is 650, and we are a program where we serve students in grades 6 through 10 all across the state, and that equates to about 4,000 students, and 87% of them increase their academic engagement. And so we know in Minnesota we have some of the worst disparities in our education system, and we also have a teacher workforce, a shortage in the teacher workforce. And because almost half of our members are students of color, or people of color, and most end up staying in the education profession. A significant amount get hired by their host sites. At least 70% of our host sites have hired a member. This is a crucial program to fund. We have an ask of $1 million each year. And so if we're looking for really effective, cost-effective ways to close the opportunity gap here in Minnesota with our students, help high school graduation, and also get folks who are interested in being teachers to stay in the education force, especially, again, with half being people of color. I know that's another bill that's up with increasing teachers of color. So this would be a really significant bill to again close that gap. And I am an alumni of this program. I served as an AmeriCorps Promise Fellow for 2 years, and then was hired directly by my host site. And I can tell you that this program significantly impacted me and many others in my cohort who were able to find meaningful work, and were able to kind of fill the gap for those needed youth workers, teachers, educators in our workforce that we desperately need in Minnesota today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Sir, we're really short on time, so you could identify yourself for the tape and proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Though I speak a lot, though I talk a lot, but I will continue to speak for the 3 minutes. My name is Abdur Sakabihi. I'm one of the Somali American community leaders. I live in Cedar Riverside. In 2016, we engaged the former governor, Governor Dayton, to break down the data, to really find out about what we are talking about. And he found out that the Somali American community were unemployed 27%, and the average age is 20 years with no resources. So Emerge, that I'm supporting today, Emerge Community Development, stepped up into the plate. And so far, by partnering with Emerge, we have created a lot of jobs. As we speak right now, hundreds and hundreds applied for CDL training in our past 2 weeks for only 30 positions. And we have 22 women from my neighborhood in Minneapolis College taking CNA classes for free. We have programs like GED we have never had in the high-rise of Cedar Riverside, where I live and raised 20 years, my family. We have a GED second group for women. We have hope of employing so many people in our community. Every year, like this year, we worry about our young population because summer is coming up. So we create jobs through that. And every time we instill hope in our community, in our young people, suddenly those programs or those fundings go away. It's a curse we have. But this time we're pleading with you to really help us. We are at the front gates engaging young people in hope and jobs. And this is the hope we have. So we want you to continue the funding Emerge and keep Cedar Riverside employed. I have 750, about a year ago, neighbors who drive 18-wheelers across the continent. We helped Metro Transit get 250 drivers, operators for their train and buses that carry you every morning for free through our center. This is our hope. We need you to sustain this funding and keep those young people and families employed. And we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Members, excuse me, that leaves one person who has signed up who has not been heard. She had planned to be here for the afternoon session. If she is on the road and heading this way, sometimes to be the last is an advantage. She will have a private meeting with the chair, and it's about the best I can do. Otherwise, I have to drag you all back here. So I appreciate the comments. Pardon? One more? Yes, sir. I wish people had.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for accepting one more. I'm Stephen Belton. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Urban League Twin Cities, formerly known as Minneapolis Urban League. I'll be brief and to the point. I want to object vigorously and strenuously to the underlying parts of this bill which would gut the equity appropriations. I would remind you that in 2016 we had the worst disparities in the nation. They have not changed. And so my concern is that the strategy that was put in place, the revenues that were allocated to address these deep and concerning disparities that have not changed, are that you're essentially abandoning that process in favor of making a grant to deed for competitive, so that these nonprofits that are on the grounds doing the work would have to compete for this. This is the equivalent, from our perspective, of putting the fox in charge of the chickens. Our relationship with DEED has been fraught, has not been productive, and the underlying idea that there's an accountability issue or there should be some inherent distrust of community organizations is simply misplaced. Your distrust in questions about accountability should be addressed at DEED, not at the organizations that are doing this work. Minneapolis Urban League Twin Cities is part of the collaborative with Emerge. We have done effective work. We have been doing effective work for a long time, work that you should be proud of, that the taxpayers of Minnesota should be pleased about. We were actually making progress. And now you are looking at gutting that and making us compete against each other at the discretion of DEED, and it is simply a misplaced strategy. I would also say that I want to call out the hypocrisy in this bill. You have this idea that you cannot trust and therefore you should not fund directly nonprofit organizations, but rather create this intermediary relationship with DEED. And yet the hypocrisy is that you are funding some nonprofits directly, some of them quite handsomely. I don't have a beef with those nonprofits. I simply want to get the same benefit, the same privilege, the same strategy, the same trust that you're doing with those nonprofits should come to us as well. So I've got an entire minute left. I'm going to leave that minute for you to ponder these remarks. I know most people have been polite and have not been blunt. I don't mean to be impolite. I am not impolite. I'm simply calling out the issue that is the 500-pound gorilla in the room that we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. What I will say is that you may call it hypocrisy, you can call it anything you want.
I call it hypocrisy.
I was respectful of you. Understand that this committee, this bill, doubles the amount of money for organizations like yourself in that grant program. Doubles the amount of money that has ever been put into that particular program. So it's not like we have cut the funding for any of these particular organizations, no matter what they do or don't do. We have asked DEED to run through and take a look at what we have looked at, because not everyone made it into that particular list. Now, again, and I've doubled that money in this particular bill. It's almost $75 million versus I can't remember the exact dollar figure from the equity grants and the grant program and other things that we did 2 years ago. So anyhow, that's just my answer to you right now. We can certainly talk offline here. We have to get out of the room. So I appreciate you coming today and having the conversation with us. With that, Representative Gunter, will you move the minutes?
I will, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor of passing the minutes as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are passed. We are adjourned.